Marcus Sterling's phone buzzed against the mahogany conference table as the final signatures dried on the acquisition papers. Hartwell Industries had just become another casualty in his relentless expansion, their CEO's hands still trembling as he gathered his documents. The man had built that company over 30 years, and Marcus had dismantled it in 3 months. Congratulations, Marcus. Nathan Cooper's voice carried across the now-empty boardroom. That's the 4th hostile takeover this quarter. Marcus didn't look up from his laptop screen. Numbers flowed past his eyes like water, each figure representing another strategic victory, another competitor eliminated. Business isn't about congratulations, Nathan. It's about survival. Right? Nathan loosened his tie, watching his business partner with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read Marcus Sterling's moods over their 8-year partnership. Maybe we should celebrate anyway. Sarah's been asking when you'll come to dinner again. The name hit Marcus like ice water. Sarah Cooper, Nathan's wife, had been trying to set him up with various women for 2 years now. She meant well, but she didn't understand that Marcus Sterling had no interest in romantic entanglements. Love was a liability he couldn't afford. Marcus closed his laptop with a sharp click. I have the Yamamoto meeting in an hour. The Yamamoto meeting was moved to tomorrow. Nathan moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. You've been avoiding social situations again. I've been working. You've been hiding. The accusation hung in the air between them. Nathan was the only person alive who could speak to Marcus that way, the only one who remembered the man he'd been before Rebecca Chun destroyed his ability to trust anyone completely. 3 years ago, Marcus had been planning to propose to Rebecca. They'd met at a tech conference, both young entrepreneurs building their empires. She was brilliant, beautiful, and ambitious. Perfect for him, or so he'd thought. He'd shared his business strategies with her, his future plans, even his weaknesses. 2 weeks before the proposal, he discovered she was selling his proprietary technology to his biggest competitor while secretly undermining his investor relationships. The betrayal hadn't just cost him millions. It had cost him something more valuable, his faith in human connection. I'm not hiding, Marcus said, gathering his files. I'm focused. Nathan watched him for a long moment. You know what your problem is? You think every relationship is a business transaction waiting to go bad. Because they are. Not all of them. Nathan pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. Actually, I've been thinking about diversifying our portfolio. Sarah mentioned an interesting opportunity yesterday. Marcus paused at the door. Nathan rarely brought up business ideas from his wife, who worked as a university administrator. What kind of opportunity? Rare manuscripts and historical documents. There's apparently a whole market for it among wealthy collectors. Nathan's eyes gleamed with the familiar spark of a new venture. Low risk, high prestige, and the profit margins are incredible if you know what you're looking for. We don't know anything about rare books. That's why we'd hire an expert. Nathan held up his phone, showing Marcus a university webpage. Sarah knows someone at UW who specializes in authentication and restoration. Brilliant woman, apparently. PhD in art history, specializes in ancient texts. Marcus found himself looking at the photo on the screen. The woman had auburn hair and intelligent eyes, but what caught his attention was her hands. They were gentle as they touched an ancient manuscript, treating it with the kind of reverence he reserved for profit margins. Her name's Emma Harrison. She's been working on some fascinating projects involving coded historical documents. Nathan put his phone away. Sarah says she's incredible at uncovering hidden meanings in old texts. Hidden meanings? Apparently, some historical documents contain more than just stories. Maps, financial records, even secret communications. Nathan straightened his jacket. Think about it. Wealthy families hiding their assets in coded manuscripts during wars, political upheavals. Some of those hiding places were never recovered. Marcus felt the familiar stirring of interest that came with a new business opportunity. What's her background? Impeccable credentials. Her father was Professor David Harrison, pretty famous in academic circles before he died in an accident 5 years ago. She inherited his research and apparently continued his work. Nathan headed toward the door. Sarah's setting up a meeting for next week, just to explore the possibilities. Marcus nodded slowly. The idea had merit. Rare manuscripts were tangible assets that appreciated over time, unlike the volatile tech stocks that dominated his current portfolio. More importantly, It was a market where emotion played less of a role than knowledge and strategy. "Set it up," he said finally. Nathan smiled. "Already did. We're meeting her Tuesday at the university library." As Nathan left, Marcus returned to the windows overlooking Seattle. The city sprawled below him, full of people making connections, taking risks, trusting each other. He'd built his empire by understanding that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every relationship was potentially compromising, every emotional investment a possible vulnerability. But business was different. Business had rules, contracts, clear expectations. If he could find profit in rare manuscripts while maintaining professional distance from the expert, it might be exactly what Sterling Technologies needed for its next phase of growth. He pulled out his phone and did what he always did when considering a new venture: research. Emma Harrison's academic papers were impressive, her expertise undeniable. Her personal life, however, was remarkably private. No social media presence, no public relationships, no obvious weaknesses he could identify. Perfect. The last thing he needed was another Rebecca Chin situation. Emma Harrison appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be: a brilliant academic with valuable knowledge and no hidden agenda. Marcus Sterling had no way of knowing that this assumption would prove to be both completely wrong and utterly life-changing. Emma Harrison's hands stopped moving across the ancient Persian manuscript as the security alarm echoed through the University of Washington Library. The third false alarm this month, but something felt different this time. She'd been working alone in the rare books section for 6 hours, and the timing seemed too convenient. She quickly closed the leather-bound volume her father had left her, the one book the university didn't know she kept in her personal collection. The same book that had been attracting unwanted attention lately. "Dr. Harrison?" The security guard's voice carried across the stacks. "Everything secure down there." "All clear, Mike." Emma slipped the Persian book into her bag, muscle memory guiding her movements. 5 years of hiding this particular manuscript had taught her to be careful. "Just me and a few thousand books that are older than both of us combined." Mike's footsteps retreated, but Emma remained tense. Someone had been asking questions about her father's research again. Yesterday, a man claiming to be a journalist had called wanting to discuss Professor David Harrison's final project. The week before, a woman had shown up at her apartment claiming to be writing a book about missing academics. Emma powered down her computer and gathered her research materials. The library felt different at night, shadows creating hiding places where none existed during the day. She'd grown up in places like this, following her father through university libraries and private collections across the country. He'd taught her to read ancient languages, to spot forgeries, to understand that some books contained more than just words. The Persian manuscript in her bag was proof of that lesson. Her phone buzzed as she reached the main floor. A text from her colleague Janet. "Heard you're meeting with some tech mogul Tuesday. Big money potential." Emma frowned. She hadn't told Janet about the meeting Nathan Cooper had arranged. Information traveled fast in academic circles, but this felt like more than gossip. She typed back, "Where did you hear that?" "Department meeting this afternoon." Cooper called the dean directly. Apparently, this Sterling guy is serious about building a collection. Emma's frown deepened. Most collectors contacted her directly or through established channels. Having Nathan Cooper arrange everything through the dean felt overly formal, almost like he was establishing an official paper trail. The parking garage felt colder than usual as Emma walked to her car. She'd learned to trust her instincts after her father's disappearance, and right now those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The timing of the security alarm, the questions about her father, and now this high-profile meeting with a tech billionaire. It felt like pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve. She drove home through Seattle's rain-slicked streets, the Persian book weighing heavily in her bag. Her father had been working on translating it when he disappeared. The police had called it an accident. David Harrison hiking alone, falling from a cliff during a storm. But Emma knew her father better than that. He was methodical, careful, especially after her mother's death. He wouldn't have taken unnecessary risks. More importantly, he wouldn't have left her alone without explanation. The book contained poems, but Emma had discovered they were more than literature. Hidden within the verses were coordinates, financial references, and names that didn't belong in 13th century Persian poetry. Her father had been close to understanding what it all meant when he vanished. Tuesday morning arrived with typical Seattle drizzle. Emma arrived at the library early, wanting to prepare for the meeting with Marcus Sterling. She'd researched him thoroughly. Tech mogul, hostile takeover specialist, known for his cold business dealings and complete lack of personal relationships. Not the typical profile of a manuscript collector, but wealth often created unexpected interests. Nathan Cooper arrived first, 10 minutes early and impeccably dressed. He was handsome in a way that seemed almost calculated, with the kind of smile that probably worked well in business negotiations. "Dr. Harrison, thank you for making time for this." His handshake was firm, professional. "Marcus is very interested in your expertise. I'm curious about his collecting goals," Emma said, leading him toward her office. Most tech entrepreneurs don't usually gravitate toward ancient manuscripts. Marcus appreciates things that have lasting value. Technology changes constantly, but historical documents. Nathan paused, looking around the library. They tell stories that never change. Something in his tone caught Emma's attention. The way he emphasized stories felt loaded with meaning. Marcus Sterling entered the library like he owned it. Emma recognized the type immediately, someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. He was taller than she'd expected, with sharp gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. When he looked at her, she felt like a business proposition being evaluated. "Mr. Sterling," she extended her hand. "Welcome to the library." His handshake was brief, businesslike. "Dr. Harrison, Nathan tells me you're an expert in manuscript authentication." Among other things, Emma gestured toward her office. "What kind of collection are you interested in building?" "Profitable ones," Marcus said without hesitation. "I understand some historical documents appreciate in value significantly." Emma felt her initial wariness crystallize into something closer to distrust. "That's true, but collecting manuscripts purely for investment purposes often leads to poor acquisitions. The most valuable pieces require deep understanding of their historical context. Which is why we'd need your expertise," Nathan interjected smoothly. "Marcus believes in hiring the best consultants available." Marcus was studying the books on Emma's shelves with the calculating gaze of someone assessing assets. What makes a manuscript valuable? Rarity, historical significance, condition. Emma watched him carefully. Sometimes the most valuable documents are those that reveal hidden information. Nathan's eyes sharpened slightly. Hidden information? Coded messages, concealed maps, financial records disguised as literature. Emma felt like she was walking through a minefield, but something compelled her to continue. Some of the most significant historical discoveries have come from texts that appeared ordinary on the surface. Marcus turned from the bookshelves. "You've worked on documents like that?" "My father and I collaborated on several projects involving coded manuscripts." The words felt dangerous as she spoke them. The field requires specialized knowledge to distinguish between genuine historical puzzles and modern forgeries. "Your father was Professor David Harrison," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question. You've done your research." "I always research my investments thoroughly." Marcus's gray eyes met hers directly. "Nathan mentioned your father died in an accident. I'm sorry for your loss." The words sounded genuine, but Emma caught something else in his expression. Marcus Sterling knew more about her father than he was admitting. "Thank you," she said carefully. "He taught me everything I know about manuscript analysis." Nathan leaned forward slightly. "Did he leave behind any unfinished projects? Research that might be valuable to collectors?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Emma felt the weight of the Persian book in her bag, remembering every warning her father had given her about protecting it. "Academic research rarely translates directly to commercial value," she said finally. Most of his work was purely scholarly. Marcus was watching her with those sharp eyes, and Emma had the unsettling feeling that he could read her evasion clearly. This man had built an empire by recognizing when people were hiding something, and she was apparently hiding something significant. "Perhaps we should start with a smaller project," Nathan suggested. "Something to establish the working relationship." Emma nodded, but her instincts were screaming warnings. This meeting felt less like a business consultation and more like an interrogation disguised as an opportunity. The authentication project Marcus Sterling had commissioned should have been straightforward. 3 16th-century Italian manuscripts, supposedly from a private estate sale, needed verification before he finalized the purchase. Emma had agreed to the work despite her reservations, partly because the fee was substantial and partly because she wanted to understand what Marcus and Nathan were really after. 2 weeks into the project, Emma was certain the manuscripts were elaborate forgeries. She sat in her office, examining the supposedly ancient parchment under a magnifying glass. The ink composition was wrong, the binding techniques too modern, and the Latin text contained grammatical errors that no educated 16th-century scribe would have made. Either Marcus Sterling had been spectacularly deceived by the seller, or this was some kind of test. Find anything interesting? Nathan's voice made her look up from her work. He'd been stopping by her office almost daily, always with reasonable excuses, but lingering longer than necessary. Today he carried coffee and wore the same calculating smile she was beginning to associate with hidden agendas. The manuscripts are fake, Emma said directly. Well-made fakes, but obvious to anyone with proper training. Nathan's eyebrows rose. Are you certain? The seller provided extensive provenance documentation. Forged provenance is easier to create than forged manuscripts. Emma set down her magnifying glass. The parchment was artificially aged, probably with tea staining and heat treatment. The ink contains synthetic compounds that weren't available until the 20th century. Marcus won't be pleased. Marcus hired me for my expertise. If he wanted someone to validate questionable purchases, he should have hired a less qualified consultant. Nathan laughed, but Emma caught something cold in his expression. You're probably right. Marcus does appreciate honesty, even when it costs him money. Emma studied Nathan's face. Something about his reaction felt wrong. Most people would be concerned about disappointing a client like Marcus Sterling, but Nathan seemed almost satisfied by the news. I'll prepare a detailed report for him, Emma said. Actually, before you do that, Nathan moved closer to her desk, his attention shifting to the books scattered across her workspace. I've been curious about your personal research. Marcus mentioned you work with coded manuscripts. Emma felt every muscle in her body tense. Sometimes, like that Persian book you carry, I've noticed you bring the same leather bag every day, and you're very protective of it. The casual observation felt like a threat. Emma forced herself to remain calm. I often reference my father's notes during authentication work. Of course, Nathan picked up one of the forged manuscripts, but his eyes kept drifting toward Emma's bag. Your father was quite famous for his work with hidden messages in historical texts, wasn't he? He was respected in academic circles. More than respected, I think. I did some research after our first meeting. Nathan set down the manuscript. Professor David Harrison was consulted by government agencies about encrypted communications in captured documents. During the war in Afghanistan, apparently. Emma's blood ran cold. Her father had never mentioned government work, but it would explain some of his extended absences during her college years. It would also explain why someone might have wanted him dead. I wouldn't know about that, she said carefully. No, of course not. Academic work, family matters, very different worlds. Nathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Still, it must be interesting, carrying on his research. Before Emma could respond, Marcus Sterling's voice cut through the tension. Nathan, what are you doing here? Marcus stood in the doorway, and Emma was surprised by the relief she felt at his arrival. Whatever game Nathan was playing, Marcus's presence seemed to interrupt it. Just checking on the authentication progress, Nathan said smoothly. Dr. Harrison has some interesting news about your manuscripts. Marcus entered the office, his sharp gray eyes taking in the scene. Emma noticed he looked specifically at her bag, then at Nathan's position near her desk. When his gaze met hers, she saw something unexpected, concern. The manuscripts are forgeries, Emma said directly. Marcus nodded as if he'd expected this news. How can you be certain? Emma launched into her technical analysis, grateful to focus on something concrete. As she explained the evidence, she watched Marcus's reaction. Unlike Nathan, who seemed pleased by the revelation, Marcus appeared genuinely interested in her methodology. He asked intelligent questions about authentication techniques and listened carefully to her answers. So the seller either didn't know they were fake or deliberately tried to deceive us, Marcus concluded. Given the quality of the forgeries and the fabricated provenance, I'd say deliberate deception is more likely. Expensive lesson, Nathan said. Maybe we should stick to safer investments. Marcus was studying Emma with those calculating eyes. Dr. Harrison, in your professional opinion, how often do collectors get targeted with sophisticated forgeries? More often than they realize. The rare manuscript market attracts criminals because buyers often rely on reputation rather than proper authentication. Emma hesitated, then decided to be direct. It's also why some dealers specifically target wealthy newcomers to the field. The implication hung in the air. Marcus Sterling, for all his business acumen, was exactly the kind of target Emma was describing. Wealthy, new to manuscript collecting, and potentially overconfident in his ability to evaluate purchases. Interesting perspective, Marcus said quietly. Nathan, could you give Dr. Harrison and me a few minutes to discuss the technical aspects of her report? Nathan's smile faltered slightly. Of course, I'll wait in the lobby. After Nathan left, Emma felt the atmosphere in the room shift. Marcus closed the office door and returned to her desk, but his demeanor had changed from business-like to something more personal. Dr. Harrison, I need to ask you something directly, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. Emma nodded, though every instinct told her to be cautious. Do you think Nathan set up this authentication project knowing the manuscripts were fake? The question surprised her with its directness. Emma looked toward the closed door, then back at Marcus. Why would you ask that? Because in 8 years of business partnership, Nathan has never suggested an investment he didn't thoroughly research first. These forgeries are obvious enough that basic due diligence should have caught them. Emma considered her response carefully. Marcus Sterling might be many things, but he wasn't stupid. If he was questioning Nathan's motives, he'd probably noticed the same inconsistencies that were making her uncomfortable. I think, she said slowly, that you should be very careful about who you trust in this business. Marcus studied her for a long moment. That's good advice. The question is whether I should trust you. The challenge in his voice made Emma meet his gaze directly. Mr. Sterling, I've just cost you a significant amount of money by being honest about these forgeries. If I were running a con, I would have validated the purchase and taken my fee. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, and Emma realized she was seeing him without his usual business mask. Behind the calculated exterior was someone who understood betrayal intimately. You're right, he said finally. Thank you for your honesty. As Marcus left her office, Emma realized that everything had just become more complicated. She was caught between Nathan's suspicious interest in her father's research and Marcus's growing mistrust of his business partner. Worse, she was starting to think that neither man was being completely honest about why they wanted her expertise. Outside her office window, Emma noticed a man in a dark coat reading a newspaper on the bench across from the library. The same man who'd been there yesterday and the day before that. Someone was definitely watching her, and Emma was beginning to understand that her father's disappearance might not have been an accident after all. Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the computer screen displaying her translation of the Persian verses. After 3 sleepless nights of cross-referencing linguistic patterns and historical contexts, the hidden message had finally emerged from her father's manuscript. What she'd found changed everything. The coordinates were unmistakable: 47, 9,021 degrees north, 123, 6,044 degrees west. Olympic National Forest, specifically a remote section near Lake Crescent that most hikers never accessed. But coordinates to what? The surrounding verses mentioned the Guardian's final rest and treasures claimed by War's shadow. Phrases that made Emma's blood run cold. Her father had been hiking in that exact area when he disappeared. A knock on her apartment door made Emma slam the laptop shut. She wasn't expecting anyone, and after noticing the man watching the library for 3 consecutive days, unexpected visitors felt threatening. Dr. Harrison? The voice was unfamiliar, deep with a slight accent she couldn't place. My name is Derek Sullivan. I have information about your father. Emma approached the door cautiously, checking the security chain. Through the peephole, she saw a man in his 40s with weathered features and intelligent eyes. He held an envelope in his hands and stood with the patient posture of someone accustomed to waiting. How do you know my father? Professor Harrison contacted me 6 months before his disappearance. He was investigating stolen art from World War II, specifically pieces that disappeared from private collections in Europe. Derek held up the envelope. He hired me to help locate items that were smuggled into the United States. Emma's mind raced. Her father had never mentioned anything about stolen art or hiring private investigators. What kind of items? The kind that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. Derek's voice carried a weight that made Emma believe him. Dr. Harrison, your father didn't die in a hiking accident. He was murdered because he discovered something that certain organizations want to keep buried. The words hit Emma like ice water. She'd suspected for 5 years that her father's death wasn't accidental, but hearing it confirmed by a stranger felt surreal. "I'm not opening this door," Emma said. "If you have information, you can call the police." "The police can't help you. The people who killed your father have connections in law enforcement." Derek moved closer to the door. "Dr. Harrison, I know you have the Persian manuscript. I know you've been working on translating it. And I know that someone else is very interested in what you've found." Emma's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her world tilt sideways. The message contained a photo of her sitting in the library yesterday, working on the translation. The accompanying text read, "We know what you're looking for. We want to make a deal." "Dr. Harrison?" Derek's voice carried urgency now. "You need to look in your hallway." Emma peered through the peephole again. Derek was holding up his phone, showing her the same photo she'd just received. But his message was different. "This was sent to me 20 minutes ago. They're watching both of us." Against every instinct screaming at her to stay behind the locked door, Emma undid the security chain. Derek Sullivan might be dangerous, but whoever was sending those photos was definitely dangerous. Derek entered her apartment quickly, immediately moving to the windows to check the street below. "How much of the manuscript have you translated?" "Enough to know my father was looking for something in Olympic National Forest." Emma kept her distance from Derek, ready to run if necessary. "Who are you really?" "I'm someone who's been hunting Nazi war criminals for 15 years. Derek turned from the window, his expression serious. "Your father discovered that a group of SS officers smuggled stolen art into the United States after the war. They've been selling pieces gradually, using the profits to fund various criminal enterprises." Emma felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. The coordinates in the manuscript lead to a cache site. Your father believed it contained not just stolen art, but documentation proving which American citizens helped the Nazis hide their assets. Derek pulled out his phone. "The people hunting you aren't just treasure seekers, Dr. Harrison. They're the descendants of the Americans who collaborated with war criminals." Before Emma could respond, her phone rang. Marcus Sterling's name appeared on the screen. "Dr. Harrison, where are you?" Marcus's voice was tense. "Nathan's been trying to reach you all day. There was a break-in at the university library." Emma felt her knees go weak. "A break-in? Your office was ransacked. Campus security found files scattered everywhere, but they said it looked like someone was searching for something specific." Marcus paused. "Emma, I think you're in danger." The use of her first name surprised her. Marcus Sterling had maintained strict professional distance since their first meeting, but now his voice carried genuine concern. "I'm at my apartment," Emma said, glancing at Derek, who was listening intently. "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." "Mr. Sterling, I don't think that's necessary." "Emma, listen to me carefully. Nathan's been asking questions about you all week. Questions about your father's research, about what manuscripts you might have inherited." Marcus's voice hardened. "I think my business partner has been lying to both of us." Emma looked at Derek, who nodded grimly. The treasure hunter mouthed words that made Emma's blood freeze. "Don't trust anyone. Mr. Sterling, there are things about my father's work that you don't understand. Things that might put you in danger too. Then we'll figure them out together. Pack a bag, Emma. Whatever's happening, you can't handle it alone." The offer surprised Emma. Marcus Sterling was known for his emotional detachment, for treating every relationship as a business transaction. But his voice carried something she hadn't expected: protectiveness. "There's someone here who claims to have information about my father," Emma said carefully. "Don't trust anyone except me," Marcus said immediately. "I'm 10 minutes away." Derek was shaking his head, pointing toward the window. Emma looked out and saw 2 black SUVs parked at opposite ends of her street. Men in dark clothing were positioned near both vehicles, trying to look casual but obviously watching her building. "Mr. Sterling, I think we have a problem," Emma said quietly. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves armed men and escape routes." Derek moved to Emma's bag, pulling out the Persian manuscript before she could stop him. He opened it quickly, scanning the pages with the expertise of someone familiar with historical documents. "Dr. Harrison, these coordinates your father found. They're not just pointing to stolen art." Derek looked up at her with an expression that mixed excitement and terror. "According to these verses, The cache contains evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful families in America. Families who've been hiding their Nazi connections for 80 years. Emma's phone buzzed with another text. This time the message was simple and direct. Bring the book to Olympic National Forest. Loan for a campground, tonight at midnight. Come alone or people will start dying. The text included photos of 3 people, Emma herself, Derek Sullivan, and Marcus Sterling entering his car 6 blocks away. Derek read the message over Emma's shoulder. They're not just watching us anymore. They're making their move. As if summoned by his words, Emma heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. Heavy, purposeful steps that stopped directly outside her door. Someone tried the handle. Derek grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her toward the back of the apartment. Is there another way out? Emma nodded toward the fire escape, her mind racing. In the span of one afternoon, her quiet academic life had become a nightmare involving Nazi treasure, murder, and people who apparently had no problem killing to protect their secrets. Outside her front door, someone was picking the lock. Emma grabbed the Persian manuscript and her emergency bag, following Derek toward the window. As they climbed onto the fire escape, she realized that Marcus Sterling was driving straight into a trap, and there was no way to warn him in time. The game had changed, and Emma Harrison was no longer just a scholar trying to understand her father's death. She was now a target in a conspiracy that had been decades in the making. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle wasn't exactly what Emma had imagined when Derek Sullivan mentioned a safe location. Water dripped through rusted ceiling panels, and the air smelled of motor oil and decay. But it was isolated, defensible, and most importantly, not on any official records that Marcus Sterling's enemies could access. Emma sat on a makeshift chair constructed from shipping pallets, watching Marcus pace the length of the empty space while Derek worked on his laptop. They'd been hiding here for 6 hours, ever since the coordinated attack on her apartment building had forced them to abandon Marcus's rescue plan. The men watching your building weren't just surveillance, Derek said without looking up from his screen. Seattle PD found 3 bodies in your apartment complex. Professional killings, execution style. Marcus stopped pacing. Bodies. Your neighbors, Dr. Harrison. The elderly couple in 3B and the graduate student in 2A. Derek's voice was matter-of-fact, but Emma saw his hands clench. These people don't leave witnesses. Emma felt bile rise in her throat. Mrs. Chun and Mr. Rodriguez had been kind to her, always asking about her research and bringing her homemade soup when she worked late. Tommy, the graduate student, had helped her carry groceries just last week. They were dead because someone wanted the Persian manuscript, and that someone now knew exactly how far they were willing to go. This is my fault, Emma whispered. If I hadn't been translating the manuscript, your father started this investigation, Marcus interrupted. You're just finishing what he began. Marcus had shed his business suit for jeans and a dark sweater Derek had provided, but he still carried himself with the controlled intensity that made him successful in corporate negotiations. Now, however, that intensity was focused on protecting her, and Emma found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with business. The way he checked the warehouse perimeter every 20 minutes. How he'd positioned himself between her and the entrance without making it obvious. The fact that he'd risked his life to help someone he barely knew, despite his reputation for ruthless self-interest. Derek, what exactly did my father discover about the stolen art? Emma asked. Derek pulled up files on his laptop, angling the screen so both Emma and Marcus could see. In 1944, a group of SS officers smuggled approximately $50 million worth of stolen artwork out of Germany. They had help from American OSS agents who were supposed to be tracking Nazi assets. The documents on screen showed shipping manifests, bank transfers, and photographs of paintings Emma recognized from art history textbooks. Priceless works by Monet, Picasso, and Van Gogh that had supposedly been destroyed during the war. The Americans who helped them received a percentage of the profits in exchange for new identities and protection, Derek continued. Some of those Americans founded major corporations, entered politics, built family dynasties. Your father discovered that several prominent Seattle families traced their wealth back to Nazi gold. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. Names. That's where it gets interesting. Derek opened another file. Your business partner Nathan Cooper's grandfather, William Cooper, was one of the OSS agents involved in the smuggling operation. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. Nathan knew. Nathan's been hunting for your father's research since the day Professor Harrison disappeared, Derek said. The Persian manuscript contains more than coordinates, Dr. Harrison. It contains account numbers, authentication codes, and most importantly, proof of which American families profited from war crimes. Marcus was staring at the laptop screen with an expression Emma had never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something colder and more dangerous. Nathan approached me about rare manuscript investments, Marcus said quietly. He specifically suggested hiring Emma for authentication work. He's been manipulating both of us from the beginning. Emma felt the walls of the warehouse closing in around her. He killed my father. Nathan probably didn't pull the trigger himself, but yes. The Cooper family has been protecting their secret for 80 years. Derek closed the laptop. The question now is what we do with this information. Marcus moved to the window, checking the street again. Emma studied his profile in the dim light, filtering through dirty glass. She'd misjudged him completely. Marcus Sterling wasn't the emotionally detached businessman she'd thought. He was someone who'd learned to protect himself by keeping people at a distance. But when he chose to trust someone, he was willing to risk everything for them. We need to get that manuscript to the authorities, Emma said. Which authorities? Derek's voice carried bitter experience. Nathan's family has had 8 decades to build connections in law enforcement, government, judiciary. We need irrefutable proof before we make any moves. The coordinates, Marcus said suddenly. We need to go to the location in Olympic National Forest. Emma shook her head. That's exactly what they want us to do. It's obviously a trap. Maybe, but it's also the only way to get evidence that can't be dismissed or covered up. Marcus turned from the window, his gray eyes meeting hers directly. Emma, if there really is a cache site with documentation proving these families' war crimes, it's worth the risk. The use of her first name sent an unexpected shiver through Emma. Somewhere during this nightmare, Marcus Sterling had stopped being a client and become something else entirely. Someone she was beginning to trust despite every lesson her father had taught her about self-protection. You don't understand what you're suggesting, Emma said. These people have killed to protect their secrets. Going to that forest location would be suicide. Marcus moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way this betrayal by Nathan had affected him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Emma, I've spent 8 years building a partnership with someone who's been lying to me since day one. Nathan Cooper used my money, my resources, my connections to hunt down evidence that could destroy his family's reputation. Marcus's voice was quiet but intense. I'm not walking away from this. Before Emma could respond, Marcus reached out and touched her hand. The contact was brief, professional, but something electric passed between them. Emma realized that Marcus Sterling wasn't just angry about being deceived. He was angry about her being threatened, about innocent people dying, about discovering that someone he'd trusted was capable of murder. We don't have to do this alone, Emma heard herself saying. Derek has contacts, resources. Derek's contacts haven't kept him alive for 15 years by taking unnecessary risks, Derek said from across the warehouse. But Dr. Harrison is right about one thing. If we're going to expose this conspiracy, we need more than just the manuscript. We need the physical evidence your father was looking for. Marcus was still standing close to Emma, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the warehouse's industrial scents. Close enough to notice that his usual mask of control was slipping, revealing someone who'd been hurt by betrayal and was choosing to trust again despite the risk. If we do this, Emma said quietly, we do it together. No one goes to that forest alone. Marcus nodded, his hand briefly touching hers again. This time the contact lasted longer, and Emma felt something shift between them. They weren't just allies anymore. They were two people who'd been betrayed by someone they trusted, finding unexpected connection in the middle of a conspiracy that could destroy them both. Outside the warehouse, Seattle continued its normal rhythm, unaware that 3 people in an abandoned building were planning to expose secrets that powerful families had killed to protect for 80 years. Emma looked at the Persian manuscript in her bag and realized that her father's final gift wasn't just a book of poetry. It was a weapon that could bring justice for war crimes that most people thought had been forgotten. The question was whether they would survive long enough to use it. The confrontation Emma had been dreading came sooner than expected. Nathan Cooper stood in the warehouse doorway at dawn, his usual charming smile replaced by something cold and calculating. He wasn't alone. Two men flanked him, their hands resting inside their jackets in a way that suggested concealed weapons. "Hello, Emma." Nathan's voice carried a casual friendliness that made her skin crawl. "You've been difficult to find." Derek was across the warehouse checking security cameras, his laptop still open, but his gun now visible on the table beside him. Marcus had left 20 minutes earlier to get supplies, which meant Nathan had timed this perfectly. "Nathan." Emma stood slowly from her makeshift chair, keeping her voice steady. "Interesting company you're keeping these days. Business associates. You understand how it is in the corporate world. Sometimes you need people with specialized skills." Nathan stepped into the warehouse, his eyes scanning the space until they found her bag containing the Persian manuscript. "I think we need to have an honest conversation about your father's research." Emma felt her heart racing but forced herself to appear calm. "What about it?" "Drop the act, Emma. I know you've translated the coordinates. I know you understand what your father discovered." Nathan's mask of civility was dissolving with each word. "The Cooper family has been protecting certain interests for a very long time. Your father threatened those interests. So you killed him. I didn't personally pull the trigger, but yes. Professor David Harrison was warned to stop his investigation. He chose to continue." Nathan moved closer, and Emma could see the resemblance to his grandfather in the way he carried himself. Entitled, ruthless, convinced of his own superiority. "Now you're making the same mistake." Derek had noticed Nathan's arrival and was moving quietly along the warehouse wall, positioning himself for a clear shot. Emma needed to keep Nathan talking until either Derek could act or Marcus returned. "My father was investigating stolen art, not threatening anyone. Your father was documenting evidence that could destroy some of America's most respected families. Do you have any idea how much money, how many political careers, how many corporate empires would collapse if that information became public?" Nathan's voice rose slightly, revealing the pressure he was under. 80 years of careful planning, and your father nearly ruined everything with his academic curiosity. Emma thought about Mrs. Chun and Mr. Rodriguez, about Tommy the graduate student, about all the innocent people who died because Nathan's family couldn't bear to have their Nazi connections exposed. "How long have you been planning this?" Emma asked. "Using Marcus, manipulating both of us." Marcus was useful but not essential. A wealthy collector looking to diversify his investments provided the perfect cover for getting close to you. Nathan laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Though I admit, I didn't expect him to develop actual feelings for you. That's been an interesting complication." The words hit Emma like ice water. Marcus had feelings for her. She thought about the way he'd protected her, the electric moments when their hands had touched, the concern in his voice when he'd called about the library break-in. "Marcus doesn't know about your family's history," Emma said. "Marcus doesn't know about a lot of things, including the fact that his beloved business partner has been systematically stealing from Sterling Technologies for years to fund our operations." Nathan pulled out his phone, showing Emma a bank statement. $50 million diverted from various projects, used to pay for the kind of people who ensure family secrets stay buried. Emma heard Derek moving behind Nathan, but the two armed men were positioned to watch for exactly that kind of approach. This was going to end badly unless she could create a distraction. "What do you want, Nathan?" "The manuscript. The coordinates. Everything your father discovered." Nathan's voice hardened into something that reminded Emma of the SS officers Derek had shown her in those old photographs. "You're going to give me everything, and then you're going to disappear. Permanently. And if I refuse?" Nathan nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage. Marcus was visible on the screen, loading supplies into his car 3 blocks away, completely unaware that crosshairs were superimposed over his image. Marcus Sterling will die in what appears to be a random carjacking gone wrong. Derek Sullivan will be found dead from an apparent drug overdose. We've had surveillance on him for months, so establishing a history of addiction won't be difficult. Nathan's smile returned, cold and triumphant. "You, however, will simply vanish. Like your father." Emma felt everything inside her crystallize into pure rage. Nathan Cooper had murdered her father, killed innocent people, stolen from Marcus, and was now threatening to destroy the only 2 people who'd risked their lives to help her. "The manuscript isn't here," Emma lied smoothly. Nathan's confidence faltered slightly. Where is it? Marcus has it. He took it when he left for supplies, as insurance. Emma met Nathan's eyes directly. You want the book? You'll have to deal with him first. It was a desperate gamble, but Emma hoped it would buy Derek time to act and give Marcus a warning when Nathan's people moved on him. She also hoped Marcus would forgive her for making him a target, assuming any of them survived the next few minutes. Nathan pulled out his phone to contact his surveillance team, and in that moment of distraction, Derek struck. The warehouse erupted into chaos as gunfire echoed off concrete walls and Emma dove for cover behind a shipping container. But when the shooting stopped and the smoke cleared, Nathan Cooper was gone, and the Persian manuscript had disappeared with him. Marcus returned to the warehouse to find Derek applying pressure to a gunshot wound in his shoulder while Emma sat against a concrete pillar, her face pale with shock. Bullet holes scarred the walls, spent shell casings littered the floor, and the acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air like a toxic fog. What happened? Marcus dropped the supply bags and rushed to Emma's side, checking her for injuries before turning to Derek. Where's Nathan? Gone. Derek grimaced as he adjusted the makeshift bandage, along with the Persian manuscript and any leverage we had in this situation. Marcus felt something cold and murderous settle in his chest. For 8 years, Nathan Cooper had been his closest friend, business partner, and confidant. They'd built sterling technologies together, shared victories and failures, trusted each other with everything. Learning that Nathan was a killer felt like discovering his own reflection was a lie. This is my fault, Marcus said quietly. I gave him access to everything: company resources, financial records, security protocols. I made it easy for him to hunt you down. Emma reached out and touched his arm. Marcus, you couldn't have known. I should have known. Nathan's been stealing from me for years, funding operations to silence anyone who threatened his family's secrets. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. While I was playing business mogul, he was using my money to pay for murders. Derek looked up from his wounded shoulder, studying Marcus with new intensity. Mr. Sterling, there's something you need to understand about this situation. Something I haven't told either of you. Emma frowned. What do you mean? Derek reached into his jacket with his good arm and pulled out a leather badge holder. Inside was an FBI identification card bearing his photograph and the name Derek Sullivan, Special Agent. I've been working undercover for 15 years, tracking Nazi war criminals and their collaborators. The Cooper family has been on our radar since 1995, but they've been careful. Too careful for us to build a case that would stand up in court. Derek closed the badge holder. Professor Harrison contacted us about his research. We were working together to gather evidence when he was murdered. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his understanding of everything that had happened. Your FBI? The Bureau has been trying to expose this conspiracy for decades. Families like the Coopers have connections in government, law enforcement, judiciary. Every time we get close, evidence disappears or witnesses die. Derek stood slowly, favoring his wounded shoulder. Dr. Harrison, your father wasn't just an academic researcher. He was our key witness. Emma was staring at Derek with a mixture of betrayal and confusion. You've been lying to us this entire time. I've been protecting you. The Bureau couldn't risk Nathan's people discovering our investigation, so I maintained my cover as a freelance treasure hunter. Derek moved to his laptop, opening encrypted files that required federal clearance to access. But Nathan's escalation changes everything. He's moved beyond careful elimination of threats to open warfare. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Nathan's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus felt his jaw clench with barely controlled rage. Answer it, Derek said quickly. Put it on speaker. Marcus accepted the call. Nathan. Hello, Marcus. I assume you've discovered my true identity by now. Nathan's voice carried the same casual friendliness that had once made Marcus consider him a brother. I want you to know that betraying you wasn't personal. Business is business. Business. Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. You murdered innocent people. You stole from me. You threatened Emma. I protected my family's interests, just like you would protect yours. The difference is that my family's interests happen to include some rather sensitive historical matters. Nathan paused. But we can discuss family loyalty later. Right now, I have a proposition for Dr. Harrison. Emma leaned closer to the phone. I'm listening. The coordinates in your father's manuscript lead to a cache site in Olympic National Forest. You're going to retrieve the contents of that cache and deliver them to me." Nathan's tone hardened. "Alone? And if I refuse? Then Marcus Sterling will discover what it feels like to lose someone he cares about." Nathan's words carried absolute certainty. "I have 3 innocent people in various locations around Seattle. A kindergarten teacher, a retired firefighter, and a college student. If you don't deliver the cache contents to me by midnight tonight, they will die slowly and painfully." Marcus felt his world narrow to a single point of focus. "Nathan, if you hurt anyone else, you'll what, Marcus? Challenge me to a hostile takeover?" Nathan laughed. "You built an empire by thinking 3 moves ahead in business negotiations. I've been thinking 30 moves ahead in a game where the stakes are generational wealth and family survival." Derek was typing rapidly on his laptop, apparently tracing the call. He shook his head. Nathan was using encrypted routing that would be impossible to track quickly. "The cache location is Lone Fir Campground, Olympic National Forest," Nathan continued. "There's a trail marker for Hurricane Ridge approximately half a mile east of the campground. The coordinates in the manuscript will lead you from there to the actual site. You have until midnight, Emma. Come alone, or innocent people die." The call ended, leaving the warehouse in tense silence. Emma stood up slowly, her expression resolute. "I have to go." "Absolutely not," Marcus said immediately. "It's obviously a trap." "Of course it's a trap. But Nathan has hostages, and I won't let innocent people die because of my father's research." Emma moved toward her bag. "Derek, can your FBI contacts help with the hostages?" Derek shook his head grimly. "We don't know who Nathan's working with or where the hostages are being held. Any attempt to locate them could trigger their execution." Marcus watched Emma preparing to walk into what would almost certainly be her death, and something crystallized inside him. For 35 years, he'd protected himself by maintaining emotional distance from everyone around him. But Emma Harrison had somehow bypassed every defense he'd built, and the thought of losing her was more terrifying than any business failure he'd ever faced. "Emma, wait." Marcus moved to block her path. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." Emma looked up at him, and Marcus saw resignation mixed with determination in her eyes. "My father died trying to expose these people. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless." Derek closed his laptop and stood up. "Actually, there might be another option. Dr. Harrison goes to the forest as Nathan demands, but she doesn't go alone." Marcus and Emma both looked at Derek. FBI surveillance at a distance, backup teams positioned around the forest, extraction protocols in place. Derek pulled out his phone. "Nathan expects her to come alone, but he won't be watching for federal agents who've been preparing for this operation for 15 years. Emma shook her head. "If Nathan detects any surveillance, the hostages die." "Not if we're good enough," Derek said. "And Dr. Harrison, after 15 years of hunting these people, we're very good at staying invisible." Marcus felt hope mixed with terror. The plan might work, but it would still require Emma to face Nathan Cooper with nothing but faith that backup would arrive in time. "Emma," Marcus said quietly, "if we do this, I'm going with you." "Marcus, you're not trained for this kind of operation." "I don't care about training. I care about you." The words came out before Marcus could stop them, but he realized he meant every syllable. 8 years ago, I decided that caring about people was too dangerous, but losing you would be worse than any betrayal Nathan could devise. Emma stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. The careful professional distance they'd maintained was dissolving, replaced by something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "All right," Derek said, breaking the moment. "I'm calling in federal backup. We have 8 hours to plan an operation that could either expose the biggest war crimes cover-up in American history or get all of us killed." Marcus looked at Emma and realized that somewhere between authentication projects and warehouse shootouts, he'd fallen in love with a woman who was about to risk her life to honor her father's memory. The only question was whether they would survive long enough for him to tell her. The trail through Olympic National Forest felt like a path toward destiny. Emma hiked alone through towering Douglas firs and ancient cedars, following the coordinates from her father's Persian manuscript while knowing that somewhere behind her, Marcus and a federal surveillance team were maintaining careful distance. The weight of the cache key, discovered hidden in the manuscript's binding during Derek's careful examination, pressed against her palm like a promise. Lone Fir Campground had been deserted when she'd arrived at sunset, exactly as Nathan had planned. The trail marker for Hurricane Ridge stood like a sentinel in the fading light, and Emma had begun the half-mile trek east with her heart hammering against her ribs. Every shadow could hide Nathan's people. Every sound could signal the beginning of the end. The coordinates led to a clearing where an enormous fallen cedar created a natural shelter. Beneath its massive trunk, Emma found what her father had died protecting, a waterproof container hidden for 80 years, waiting for someone brave enough to expose the truth. Inside the container were documents that would rewrite American history. Shipping manifests showing Nazi gold entering the United States through Seattle ports. Bank records detailing how stolen art was converted to legitimate investments. Photographs of SS officers meeting with American businessmen, including a young William Cooper shaking hands with a Nazi commander. Most damning of all were the lists, names of American families who had built their fortunes on war crimes, complete with account numbers and authentication codes that prove the money trail from Nazi gold to modern corporate empires. Fascinating reading, isn't it? Emma spun around to find Nathan Cooper emerging from the tree-line, flanked by two armed men. In the gathering darkness, his familiar features looked predatory, transformed by the knowledge of what he was capable of. Nathan, Emma clutched the documents to her chest. Where are the hostages? Safe for now, though their continued safety depends entirely on your cooperation. Nathan gestured toward the cash container. Is that everything? Everything my father found, yes. Emma forced her voice to remain steady. Now release the innocent people. Nathan laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the forest clearing. Dr. Harrison, you've misunderstood the situation entirely. Those hostages aren't insurance for your cooperation. They're leverage for what comes next. Emma felt ice water flood her veins. What do you mean? I mean that you, Marcus Sterling, and Agent Derek Sullivan are all going to disappear tonight. The FBI will find evidence that you three were killed by foreign agents interested in stealing Nazi treasure. Nathan pulled out his phone, showing Emma surveillance footage of Marcus moving through the forest toward their location. Your lover is walking into a trap, and federal backup won't reach this location in time to save any of you. But Nathan had underestimated both the FBI's planning and Marcus Sterling's determination. As his words echoed through the clearing, Derek Sullivan's voice came through hidden speakers positioned around the site. Nathan Cooper, you're surrounded by federal agents. Drop your weapons and step away from Dr. Harrison. Nathan's face contorted with rage. Impossible. Our surveillance showed decoy routes planned specifically to mislead your people. Derek's amplified voice continued. The real federal operation has been in position for 6 hours. Nathan raised his gun toward Emma, but before he could fire, Marcus Sterling exploded from the undergrowth like an avenging angel. The tech mogul who'd built his empire through careful calculation had abandoned all strategy in favor of pure protective fury. The impact sent Nathan sprawling, and suddenly the clearing erupted with federal agents emerging from positions that had been invisible moments before. Gunfire lit up the forest for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, and when the chaos settled, Nathan Cooper lay unconscious with zip-tie restraints around his wrists. Emma found herself in Marcus's arms before she fully processed that the danger was over. He was holding her like she might disappear, his usual controlled demeanor shattered by relief and something much deeper. Emma, when I saw him pointing that gun at you. Marcus's voice was rough with emotion he'd spent years suppressing. I realized that losing you would be worse than any betrayal, any business failure, anything that's ever happened to me. Before Emma could respond, Derek approached with a smile that transformed his weathered features. Dr. Harrison, there's someone who's been waiting 5 years to see you. Emma turned toward the tree-line and felt her world reshape itself completely. A man emerged from behind the federal perimeter, older than she remembered, his hair gone gray, but unmistakably alive. Hello, Emma. Professor David Harrison had aged in witness protection, but his eyes still held the same gentle intelligence that had guided Emma through childhood. She ran toward him with tears streaming down her face, 5 years of grief and guilt dissolving in an embrace that smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. Dad, the word came out as a sob. I thought you were dead. I thought it was my fault somehow. Never your fault, sweetheart. I had to disappear to protect you, to work with the FBI to build a case against these people." David Harrison held his daughter tight, then looked over her shoulder toward Marcus. "Though I understand you found someone willing to risk everything to keep you safe." Marcus approached carefully, still processing the reunion he was witnessing. "Professor Harrison, your daughter saved my life in more ways than one." David studied Marcus with the assessing gaze of a protective father. "Mr. Sterling, Emma's told me about you through Derek's reports. You gave up everything to help her expose this conspiracy." "I gave up nothing that mattered," Marcus said, his eyes finding Emma's. "I gained everything that does." Derek was coordinating with the federal teams, but Emma caught fragments of radio chatter that made her heart soar. The hostages had been rescued safely. Nathan's associates were in custody. The cash documents were now federal evidence that would bring down not just the Cooper family, but a network of Nazi collaborators that had hidden in plain sight for 80 years. As dawn broke over Olympic National Forest, Emma found herself standing between her father and the man she'd fallen in love with, watching federal agents catalog evidence that would rewrite American history. The Persian manuscript that had started this journey lay open on a folding table, its secret codes finally revealed and its purpose fulfilled. "So what happens now?" Emma asked. Marcus moved closer to her, his hand finding hers with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who knew him only through business dealings. "Now we have choices to make." "What kind of choices?" "Whether you'd be interested in a business partnership that has nothing to do with rare manuscripts." Marcus's gray eyes held vulnerability Emma had never seen before. "Whether you'd consider taking a chance on someone who spent years thinking love was too dangerous to risk." Emma looked at this man who'd risked his empire, his life, and his carefully constructed emotional defenses for her. Marcus Sterling had proved that love wasn't a business transaction or a liability to be managed. It was something worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth building a life around. "I'd consider it," Emma said, standing on her toes to kiss him as the sun rose over the forest where her father's truth had finally been revealed. 6 months later, Emma Harrison Sterling stood in the rare books section of the university library, wearing a white dress and surrounded by the manuscripts that had brought her and Marcus together. Their wedding had been small, intimate, witnessed by family and the federal agents who'd become unlikely friends. The Cooper conspiracy trials were making headlines across the country, exposing a network of Nazi collaboration that reached into the highest levels of American society. Emma had testified as a key witness, her father's research finally getting the recognition it deserved. Marcus had rebuilt Sterling Technologies without Nathan's toxic influence, creating a company culture based on transparency rather than ruthless ambition. He'd also established the David Harrison Foundation for Historical Truth, funding research into war crimes and their modern consequences. Most importantly, Marcus Sterling had learned that love wasn't a weakness to be avoided but a strength that made everything else worthwhile. As Emma adjusted her wedding veil among the ancient books that had saved her life, she realized her father had been right about hidden meanings. Sometimes the most valuable treasures weren't gold or art. They were truth, justice, and the courage to love someone completely despite the risks. The Persian manuscript sat in a place of honor on their wedding altar, its codes finally decoded, its secrets revealed, its purpose magnificently fulfilled.